The rain had been falling for hours, slicking the highway into a mirror of headlights and shadows. Sarah kept her hands tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles pale from the strain. It was supposed to be a quick drive, just a shortcut through Pennsylvania backroads to shave an hour off the trip. But somewhere along the twisting forest roads, the GPS had glitched, freezing on a screen that only showed a blank patch of gray. Her best friend Jenny had been sitting beside her, scrolling frantically through her phone for any signal, while the guys, Mike and Tyler, dozed in the back. They'd been laughing earlier, blasting music, but by the time the rain thickened and fog rolled across the trees like smoke, the car had fallen into silence. "Sarah, I think you missed a turn like 10 miles ago," Jenny muttered, frowning at the frozen GPS. "This isn't even showing us on a road anymore." "I didn't miss anything," Sarah shot back, tension sharpening her voice. "The GPS must be screwed. Look, we'll hit a town soon. There has to be one around here." But the forest pressed in closer with every mile, the pines looming high and dripping wet, their silhouettes forming black walls on either side of the road. The radio hissed with static no matter what station Sarah tried. Her phone battery had drained to a red sliver. And then, through the fog, the headlights caught something. A sign. It was warped and old, the paint faded, but the words were clear. "Welcome to Hollow Creek, established 1823. There," Sarah exhaled relief. "A town, I told you." Jenny squinted at the sign as they rolled past. The wood looked splintered, as though someone had clawed chunks out of it. The letters seemed almost burned into the surface, blackened around the edges. She swallowed. "Why haven't I ever heard of Hollow Creek?" Mike groaned from the back, rubbing his eyes. "Who cares? Food, gas, bathrooms, I'll take it." The car crested a small hill, and suddenly Hollow Creek appeared below them. The town looked frozen in time. Wooden storefronts lined a main street lit by flickering yellow lamps. Houses with peaked roofs leaned at odd angles, some with shutters banging in the wind. The road was empty, but porch lights glowed in neat rows, like watchful eyes waiting for them. Sarah slowed the car, glancing nervously at the clock on the dashboard. 11:07 p.m., the four of them exchanged uneasy looks. Something about the town didn't feel alive, yet the lamps burned steady as if expecting their arrival. "Looks quiet," Tyler murmured. His voice carried a note of awe, but also dread. "Like one of those old Wild West sets in movies." "Or a ghost town," Jenny whispered. But as Sarah drove slowly down Main Street, curtains twitched in windows. They caught glimpses of pale faces peering out, only to vanish when the car passed. The silence was overwhelming. No barking dogs, no distant hum of traffic, not even crickets. Just the low squeak of the windshield wipers and the crunch of wet gravel under tires. "Okay, this is weird," Mike muttered. "Where's the gas station? A diner, anything?" As if on cue, they spotted a building with a faded sign that read Hollow Creek Diner. Its neon letters buzzed faintly, half burned out. Sarah parked in front, the headlights casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. "Food," Mike said with forced cheer, unbuckling. "See, normal town, we're fine." They stepped out into the night. The air was heavy, colder than it should have been for late summer, and it carried a smell faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Sarah shivered as they pushed open the diner door. A small bell jingled above them. Inside, the place looked straight out of the 1950s. Vinyl booths with red cushions, chrome trim glinting under dim yellow bulbs, a jukebox sitting silent in the corner. But what unsettled Sarah most was the people. Every booth was occupied. Men in dusty overalls, women in long dresses, children in patched clothes. They all sat perfectly still, staring at the newcomers with unblinking eyes. Jenny clutched Sarah's arm. "Sarah, they're dressed wrong." Indeed, the outfits looked decades, maybe a century, out of place. The silence was suffocating until at last, a waitress stepped forward. Her uniform was crisp, but the fabric seemed yellowed with age. She smiled, though her teeth were oddly too straight, too perfect. "Welcome," she said softly. "Travelers don't come this way often." Sarah forced a smile. "Yeah, we're just passing through. We got lost." "Is there a gas station here?" The waitress tilted her head. "There's no leaving Hollow Creek tonight, but we'll take care of you until morning." The words hung in the air like a warning. Sarah glanced at her friends, but Mike was already sliding into a booth, oblivious. "I'll take a burger, fries, milkshake," he said cheerfully, pulling a menu closer. Jenny hissed, "Mike, seriously, you don't think this is creepy as hell?" But the smell of food was drifting from the kitchen, warm, comforting, nostalgic. Tyler's stomach growled, and even Sarah felt her resolve weaken. They sat together at a booth while the townsfolk continued staring, their expressions blank, hollow. When the food came, it looked perfect. Burgers steaming, golden fries, milkshakes thick and frothy. Mike dug in eagerly. Tyler followed hesitantly. Sarah picked at her fries, her stomach twisting. Jenny didn't touch hers at all. That's when Sarah noticed something. At the far end of the diner, a clock ticked loudly. The hands moved steadily toward midnight. And as each minute passed, the townsfolk's smiles grew wider, their eyes hungrier. Jenny leaned close, whispering so low it was almost inaudible. "Sarah, I don't think they're eating. Look at their plates." Sarah's gaze darted around. Every booth had plates piled high with food, but none of the townsfolk had touched them. They sat motionless, staring, waiting. The clock read 11:42. Panic rose in Sarah's chest. Something about this place was wrong, not just old-fashioned, not just eerie. Wrong in a way her body felt before her mind could explain. She nudged Mike. "We need to go now," Mike scoffed, mouth full. "Relax. It's food, it's a diner, it's fine. You're just spooked because it's old-timey." "Look at them," Sarah snapped, pointing subtly. At that exact moment, every diner patron tilted their head in unison, eyes glimmering with something unnatural, as though they'd been waiting for the cue. The clock struck 11:45, and then the waitress returned, her smile sharp as glass. She placed the bill on the table, though the paper was blank. "Stay as long as you like," she whispered. "But whatever you do, don't be outside at midnight." The bell above the door jingled suddenly. A man staggered in, drenched in rain, his clothes ragged and torn. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. He fell to the floor, gasping. He choked, "They don't let you leave." And then, before anyone could move, two men from the booths rose, their movements stiff but fast, and dragged him back outside into the night. The bell jingled again. Silence returned. The clock read 11:50. The diner clock ticked toward midnight with an almost unbearable weight, each second louder than the last. Sarah's chest tightened with panic. Her friends sat frozen in disbelief, and the strange townsfolk still stared with those hungry, hollow eyes. Jenny gripped Sarah's wrist so tightly her nails dug in. "We have to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't care where we go, we can't be here when that clock hits 12. Sarah nodded. She glanced at Mike, who was still chewing, though slower now, clearly unnerved by the man who had been dragged out. Tyler stared at the door, pale as chalk. The bell jingled faintly as the wind rattled the frame, but no one else entered. The waitress leaned down, her voice a velvet warning. "Stay indoors. Whatever you do, don't watch them." Sarah swallowed hard. "Watch who?" But the waitress was already gone, disappearing into the kitchen like smoke. The clock hands aligned at 11:55. The silence in the diner grew thick, suffocating. Sarah forced herself to move. "Come on," she hissed. "We're leaving." She pulled Jenny up, dragging her toward the door. Tyler followed instantly, but Mike resisted. "What's your problem? They said not to be outside at midnight. Maybe it's safer here." "Do you want to end up like that guy?" Sarah snapped. "Dragged off into God knows what." That shut him up. He stood, still chewing the last bite of his burger as though clinging to some sense of normalcy. Together they hurried to the door. The moment Sarah touched the handle, the entire diner inhaled at once. Dozens of people drew in a long, slow breath. Sarah froze, the hairs on her arms rising. Then, as if on cue, every single diner patron turned their heads to the window. Sarah looked too. At first she thought the fog had thickened, but no shapes were moving in it. Dozens of shadowy figures, long-limbed and crooked, drifting down Main Street. Their faces were wrong, blurred like smudged charcoal, with gaping mouths that stretched wider and wider as they moved. They made no sound, no footsteps, only a faint rustling like dead leaves. Jenny clapped her hand over her mouth. "Oh my God!" The waitress appeared behind the counter, her face pale now, her smile gone. "Don't let them see you," she hissed. "Don't look at them for too long. If they know you're watching, they'll come inside." The clock struck midnight. The street outside erupted with movement. Shadows pressed against the glass, faces flattening, mouths opening wider until they split their heads in two. The diner's windows shuddered, as if under pressure. The townsfolk remained calm, staring at their plates, unmoving. One shadow paused, turning its blank face toward Sarah's window, its head cocked, almost curious. Sarah dropped to the floor instantly, pulling Jenny with her. "Don't look at them," she whispered. Tyler was shaking violently, crouched behind the booth. Mike swore under his breath, finally realizing this was no joke. The sound outside grew louder, a scraping, like claws dragging across asphalt. Sarah risked a glance at the clock. 12:03. How long did this last? Suddenly, the bell above the diner door jingled. Slowly, painfully slow, the door creaked open. The waitress gasped, her face going white. The shadows couldn't come in uninvited, but someone had opened the door. The man who had been dragged outside earlier stood in the doorway. His eyes were black voids now, his jaw unhinged and broken. He stepped inside, jerking unnaturally as though strings pulled his limbs. The waitress screamed. The man lunged at the nearest booth. The family inside didn't fight, they simply sat there as he tore into them with inhuman strength, his face splitting wider than bone should allow. Black smoke poured from the wounds instead of blood. Jenny shrieked. Sarah grabbed her hand, bolting for the kitchen. "Go!" They ran through swinging doors into a greasy, dim backroom lined with rusting appliances. The smell of spoiled meat hung heavy. Tyler stumbled after them, and Mike slammed the door shut. But the sound of chairs scraping, glass shattering, and inhuman screams filled the diner behind them. The waitress appeared, blood smeared across her uniform. She clutched Sarah's arm, wild-eyed. "You can't run. The town keeps you once you've entered. The only way to survive is to make it until dawn." "Then tell us how," Sarah begged. The waitress trembled, her voice cracking. "You can't fight them. You can't leave, you hide, you pray." Mike snarled, grabbing her collar. "That's not good enough, there has to be a way out." But before she could answer, the kitchen lights flickered violently. Shadows stretched along the floor, creeping toward their feet. The waitress screamed, shoving them toward the back exit. "Go!" she yelled. "Don't stop moving!" They burst out into an alley behind the diner. The fog was thicker here, curling like smoke around their legs. Shapes moved at the edges of vision, too fast, too tall. A street lamp buzzed overhead, flickering between light and dark. "Where do we go?" Tyler panted, his breath ragged. Sarah scanned desperately. Beyond the alley, she saw a church steeple rising above the buildings. Its bell tower stood tall, and faintly, very faintly, she thought she heard the sound of ringing. "The church!" she cried. "That's where we'll be safe." They ran, feet pounding the cracked pavement. The shadows swirled closer, hissing now, their whispers brushing Sarah's ears. "Stay, stay, stay." Jenny stumbled, nearly falling. Sarah yanked her upright just as a hand, long, skeletal, with too many joints, shot from the fog, grasping at Jenny's ankle. Jenny screamed. Mike kicked at the hand, shouting until it released her. They barreled up the steps of the church and slammed the heavy doors behind them. The sound of scratching immediately began, nails dragging across wood. Sarah collapsed against the door, her chest heaving. Inside, candles flickered faintly, though no one had lit them. Pews stretched into darkness, and at the altar stood a man in black robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing too much in the cavernous room. "You've made it this far, not many do." The church doors rattled under the weight of unseen hands, the scratching and pounding echoing through the wooden frame. Sarah pressed her shoulder against it, praying it would hold. Jenny sobbed quietly, her fingers trembling as she clung to Sarah's sleeve. Tyler had collapsed onto a pew, his face pale and slick with sweat, while Mike stood tense, fists clenched, glaring at the hooded figure at the altar. The man in the robes lifted his head slightly, though his face remained hidden in shadow. "They will not enter here," he said calmly. His voice carried an odd weight, like every word was meant to soothe yet unsettle. "This place is consecrated. For now you are safe." Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. "Safe from what?" The man tilted his head as though amused by the question. "From the Hollow Ones. The town belongs to them after midnight. And you, unfortunately, belong to the town now." Jenny let out a strangled cry. "No, no, we're just passing through. We didn't know." The hooded figure chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Ignorance does not free you. Hollow Creek chooses who enters. The fog, the road, the broken compass of your machines. You were brought here." Mike stepped forward, his voice sharp with anger. "Then tell us how to get out. There has to be a way." The figure was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pulled back his hood. His face was pale, unnaturally smooth, almost wax-like, and his eyes gleamed silver in the candlelight. He looked both human and something else entirely, something wrong. "There is one way," he whispered, "but it comes at a price." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What price?" The figure walked down the aisle toward them, his robes whispering against the floor. "Hollow Creek demands balance. For new souls to escape, another must stay. A trade, that is the law written into its bones." The words hit like a physical blow. Jenny gasped, backing away. Tyler shook his head violently. "No. No, you can't mean." The man spread his arms. "One of you must remain when the sun rises, one sacrifice so that the others may go." The church fell into silence. Outside, the scratching grew louder, more furious. Sarah could almost feel the shadows pressing against the stained glass windows, their blurred faces distorting the colored glass. Mike cursed under his breath. "That's bullshit. There's no way this is the only option." The figure smiled faintly. "You may wait until dawn and test your luck. But if no sacrifice is made, none of you will leave Hollow Creek." Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. Her mind raced, searching for another answer, but nothing came. Jenny's sobs filled the air, Tyler muttered prayers under his breath, and Mike paced like a caged animal. The man gestured toward the altar. "Decide before the clock strikes 6. Until then, this sanctuary will hold. But when dawn breaks, the choice will be sealed." He turned and drifted back into the shadows behind the altar, disappearing into a hidden doorway. The four of them were left alone in the flickering candlelight. Jenny collapsed onto a pew, covering her face. "I can't do this. I can't, Sarah, tell me this isn't real." Sarah knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "I don't know what's real anymore, but we'll figure something out. We're not leaving anyone behind." Mike let out a bitter laugh. "Easy for you to say, but what if it's the only way? Better one person than all of us, right?" Sarah glared at him. "Don't even start." Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaky. Maybe there's another way. Did you hear what he said? He didn't say the Hollow Ones kill the sacrifice. He just said they stay. What if it's survivable?" Jenny shot him a horrified look. "Survivable? You saw what they did to that man in the diner." The argument spiraled, voices rising, fear boiling over. But then the church bell rang, a single deep chime that made the floorboards tremble. Sarah froze. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. and the candles flickered violently. From the far end of the church, the stained glass window depicting an angel cracked, a hairline fracture running across its face. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "We're not as safe as he said." The scratching outside grew more violent. Shapes pressed harder against the glass, leaving streaks of black ichor. Sarah swore she saw a mouth moving behind the window, whispering her name. "Sarah!" Her blood froze. She spun, heart pounding. The voice had been clear, unmistakable, her mother's voice. But her mother had died 2 years ago. Jenny grabbed her hand. "Did you hear that too?" Sarah nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. The whisper came again, this time from the other side of the church. "Sarah, come outside, it's safe here." Tyler whimpered, covering his ears. "Don't listen to them, they lie, they always lie." Mike, however, looked shaken in a different way. His eyes darted to the door. "It's my dad's voice," he whispered. "I swear to God I just heard him." Jenny snapped, "It's not real, Mike." But Mike wasn't listening. He moved toward the door, his steps uneven, his face slack with longing. Sarah lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "Mike, stop!" He jerked free, wild-eyed. "You don't understand, it's him, he's calling for me." Before anyone could stop him, he threw open the door. The fog surged in, icy and thick, and for a split second Sarah saw his father's silhouette standing in the street, arms open wide. Mike let out a sob and stumbled forward. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls. Jenny screamed. Tyler collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Sarah ran to the door, but when she tried to wrench it open, it wouldn't budge. Through the window, she saw only swirling fog. Mike was gone. The church bell rang again. 2 a.m. The candles sputtered lower, their flames thinning. The safety of the sanctuary felt weaker by the minute. Sarah backed away from the door, her heart breaking. She had lost one of her friends already, and there was no telling how much longer they could hold out. Jenny whispered, her voice hoarse, If one of us has to stay, maybe Mike already did. Maybe that counts." Sarah shook her head. "No, he went willingly. That wasn't the sacrifice. That was a trick. They got him." Tyler lifted his head, his face pale and wet with tears. "Then what do we do?" Sarah didn't have an answer. But deep in her gut, She knew this night was only getting worse. The clock tower's bell struck once more, the deep tone echoing through the abandoned streets as Sarah, Jake, and the few remaining survivors stumbled toward the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The mist grew thicker with every step, pressing against their chests like an invisible weight, threatening to suffocate them if they lingered too long. Behind them, the town seemed to shift, its streets rearranging, buildings groaning as though alive. "Keep moving," Sarah shouted, pulling Jake's arm as he faltered. A shadow moved swiftly along the rooftops, something tall hunched, with too many limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the darkness. It let out a hiss that rattled the windows of nearby houses, a sound both human and monstrous. The group broke into a run, but every turn they made brought them back to the same square, where the old fountain bubbled with water as black as oil. "It's looping us," cried Emma, the last stranger they'd met along the way. Panic set in as the truth dawned. Hollow Creek would never let them go without a price. Jake stumbled near the fountain, and the ground beneath him cracked open like glass shattering. Long, pale arms shot out from below, clutching at his legs with skeletal fingers. He screamed, clawing at the cobblestones as Sarah tried to drag him free. "Don't let go," she cried, but the thing beneath pulled harder, dragging him toward the abyss. Emma shrieked and kicked at the hands, her foot sinking into something that wasn't flesh but thick, tar-like liquid. With one desperate pull, Sarah yanked Jake free, his shoe left behind in the dark grasp. The fountain water boiled, faces pressing against its surface, men, women, and children, trapped souls screaming soundlessly as if begging for release. The bell tolled again, now deafening, shaking the very ground. Windows burst open, shutters slamming like jaws, and doorways filled with shadowy figures of the town's long-dead residents. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly as they began to march toward the survivors. "We can't stay here," Jake shouted, his voice raw. "The sign, find the sign." Sarah remembered the faded wooden marker they had passed when first arriving. If the town had an entry point, maybe it also had an exit. With no other choice, they bolted through the shifting streets, the townsfolk closing in from every direction. The air reeked of decay and something older, fouler, as if the very ground beneath them was rotting. Finally, through the mist, the outline of the wooden sign appeared. But in its place now was something different. The words "Welcome to Hollow Creek," established 1823. "Visitors never leave." The paint looked fresh, dripping as though written in blood. The group froze. The mist swirled, thickening, and the shadows drew closer. Sarah's heart pounded, but her instincts screamed at her to act. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose shard of wood from the ground and drove it into the earth near the sign. The shadows recoiled, hissing violently, as though some boundary had been disturbed. For a moment, the mist parted, revealing a glimpse of the highway they had been searching for. The world beyond looked painfully bright, alive, real. "Go!" Sarah yelled. Emma darted through the opening, vanishing instantly. Jake hesitated, glancing back as the towering figure with too many limbs dropped from the rooftops, landing with a ground-shaking thud. It stood there, hunched and grotesque, its body a patchwork of every soul the town had consumed. Its voice came out as a chorus of whispers. "Stay, forever!" Sarah shoved Jake toward the opening. He stumbled through, disappearing into the daylight. Sarah turned back one last time, her chest heaving, as the creature stepped closer, its claws outstretched. With everything she had left, she screamed and hurled herself toward the rift in the mist. Cold hands brushed against her as she dove through, and for a heartbeat, She felt her soul being tugged in two directions at once. Then darkness. Sarah gasped awake, her body sprawled on the cold asphalt of a highway shoulder. The mist was gone. The air smelled of pine trees and rain, and the sun was rising in the distance. For a moment, she thought it was over. Jake was beside her, coughing hard, his face pale but alive. Emma knelt a few feet away, trembling violently, staring into the horizon as though afraid to look behind her. Cars passed on the road, their drivers honking in confusion at the sight of three disheveled strangers stumbling out of nowhere. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was thin, brittle, because deep inside, she knew something was wrong. Jake reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. "We made it, we actually made it." But his voice cracked, and when she looked at him, his eyes flickered unnaturally, glowing faintly the same way the townsfolk's eyes had in Hollow Creek. Sarah yanked her hand back, horror flooding through her veins. Emma whispered, "Look!" Slowly, all three turned toward the tree line. The mist was still there, hanging thick and heavy beyond the road. And through it, just visible, was the crooked wooden sign. But now it read, Hollow Creek, established 1823. Population 3. Sarah's stomach dropped. The number carved into the wood began to burn and shift. A new line etched itself beneath it, as though carved by an unseen hand. Visitors accounted for. The mist seemed to pulse, almost breathing, and faint shadows moved within, pressing against the barrier like trapped insects against glass. Before she could speak, Jake doubled over, choking violently. His skin blistered as though boiling from the inside. He looked up, his expression torn between agony and terror. "It's inside me," he rasped, before collapsing in a heap. His body convulsed, twisting into shapes that no human body should ever take. Emma screamed and stumbled back, but the highway around them remained eerily empty. None of the passing cars slowed. None of the drivers even seemed to notice what was happening. Sarah realized with dawning dread, they hadn't escaped Hollow Creek at all. They were still inside it. The illusion of the highway flickered, the sun dimmed, and the mist swallowed everything whole. Street lamps flickered back into existence. Hollow Creek stood before them again, unchanged, timeless, as though they had never left. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing, while the distant toll of the clock tower echoed through the streets once more. Midnight striking again, even though dawn had just risen. Emma's voice broke as she whispered, "There's no way out." From the shadows of the square, the towering creature appeared once more, its many-limbed form stretching unnaturally across the rooftops. Its chorus voice echoed through the air, rattling the very ground. "You belong to Hollow Creek now." The streets filled with the glowing-eyed townsfolk, their faces twisted in eternal torment, their footsteps perfectly in sync as they closed in. Sarah clutched Jake's twitching, broken body, her mind a whirl of terror, denial, and despair. The last thing she saw before the mist swallowed her completely was the wooden sign glowing faintly in the darkness, its letters rewriting themselves again. Hollow Creek, established 1823. Population 4. And then there was nothing.